Hello and welcome. I am the Bush Whisperer, and I'd like to welcome you to what is going to be a rather difficult interview. There is a client of mine that I've known for a number of years, and I've helped her through some difficult situations. She is a survivor from a SRA cult, Satanic ritual abuse. You might be aware, you might have heard of a fairly well-known, high-profile cult from Australia that was known as many names. It was known as the family, simply the family. And they were also known as the Satanic and Keaton Park Association or the Great White Brotherhood. They were a sort of fringe New Age Christianity spiritual group formed in the mid-60s under the leadership of Anne Hamilton Byrne. She was born Evelyn Grace Victoria Edwards. And the group taught a mixture of Western and Eastern religious doctrines, and they were found to be doing things with children that were inappropriate. And the group became the center of controversy when its compound in Olinda, Victoria, was raided by the police on 14th of August 1987 amid allegations of child abuse. All children were removed from the premises and were discovered to have been adopted through illegal means. This is all going to be discussed in this discussion. I have one of the survivors, and I have kept her identity private for she has been surveilled by this cult. And even though it says here that the cult no longer exists, they do exist in an alternative fashion. This is a bigger cult than what we are aware of here. And we're going to be getting some firsthand witness testimony of what one particular lady has suffered throughout a span of many years of her life. And so, yeah, you're going to have to buckle up. This is going to be a tough ride. This cult was toxic. The children had been gained through God only knows what means. The police had basically allowed this woman to get away with the fact that she had a whole lot of children there that were unregistered and nobody knew whose kids they were. And she had false birth certificates and false things made up for these children. And anyway, she had money. She was very rich. This cult had a lot of money. So she got away with it. As we know, this is often the case with such situations. People with money tend to get away with just about anything. So we've got a lady here. It's a totally unedited discussion. It's 7 hours of footage. I'm splitting it up into convenient chunk size bites for you. I'm not going to edit it at all, other than to edit out her name when I've said it, because I'm protecting her identity. She's still afraid of this organization. And she believes that they are still operating because some of her family are still part of this cult. And she has been accosted since, in the last 25 years, she has been accosted. But I'm going to let her tell her story. I'm going to try not to interfere too much, just to help to keep the line of the story in terms of the timeline as close to a rational timeline as possible. Understand it's a very emotional matter for this lady. She's lost her children to this cult, and they've done immeasurable harm to her. And so, yeah, I hope you're going to be able to sit through this. It's a very difficult interview, I'm going to be honest. I found it very challenging myself. I've known about this for a number of years, though the details that were disclosed to me here were shocking even to myself. And it ranges from everything from sexual abuse to ritualistic abuse to sacrifice, animals, humans, you name it. It's horrendous. We're talking full psyops mind control practices in the fashion of My Labs of the UK. Those of you that know My Labs, although it's known as different um, under different names in different countries. And but I don't want to detract from this lady's testimony. I hope you're going to be able to sit through this. The first hour is going to be a bit slow. As we went deeper into these interviews, the Ms. X, as I'm calling her, was able to loosen up more and open up more as she felt more safe. This is one of the first interviews she's ever done with anyone. She had brought this case up with the police and tried through the court judicial systems, but the organization that she was affronting have incredible power. As the interview itself will disclose to you, this is not for the weak stomach type. So make sure you've eaten well, and you might want to do this in small doses. So here it comes, an unadulterated, unaffected 7 hours of footage, episode by episode, so that I don't OD you with this harsh information. It's not for those of you to be afraid of such things. It's for you to be aware that these things are happening and to pay attention to these new age cults, not to get sucked into them. So this is quite an educational discussion. The reason the Miss X wanted to come forward is because she doesn't want other people to fall into the trap that many people fall into. And they don't realize what kind of organizations they're getting into. People have to watch out for cults. They are incredibly dangerous. Without any further ado, here comes the interview. Buckle up, take it easy, and burn some incense. Make sure you're well hydrated. Sending you big love. This is the Bush Whisperer. Om Shanti. Here we are with a guest that I've known for a number of years. We're going to call this guest Ms. X because privacy is a concern. And when you hear the story that this lady has to tell, you're going to understand exactly why it is this privacy is so absolutely necessary. We're bringing her into the studio now. Ms. X, hello and welcome. How are you today?
Hello. I'm fine, thank you.
Good. Now, just for those of you that don't know, there was an organization that was run by a lady called Anne Hamilton Burns, the family. You might have found out about it on the internet, though you can Google it, and there is information out there available about the nature of this child abducting ring of satanic abusers that were managing a cult that was highly toxic, dangerous, by a woman that seems to have been a mad woman that, believe it or not, owned a psychological institute. She had a place where she used to send people that didn't agree with her, and she had doctors working for her. This is a very, very scary story, and I'd like to just throw it out there, and let's just get straight into the nitty-gritty. Ms. X, when was it that you first met Anne Hamilton? How old were you?
I really don't know. I only realized back in it would have been about 1993 that I realized that something strange was going on. Previous to that, in 1987, I was told about it by my daughter, who was then approximately 5 years of age. And it was all new to me. I had no idea of the control that she had over me or what the cult was doing. I was living my life, as it were, and my daughters, who were very young, told me that they were being sexually abused by by whom I believed was their father. I have come to realise that he fathered one of my children. The other children were not fathered by him. So I found out about Anne Hamilton Byrne in about 87, and at this stage there was a lot of publicity about this woman, which I didn't access at the time, but there had been a raid by the police to rescue some children from a place called Eildon, which is a small town, isolated town in Victoria, in the Dandenongs, on the outskirts of Melbourne, but then that's where her headquarters were. But Eildon was a number of k's from this vicinity. I have very little memory of meeting her, but I know that it has occurred. So I'm not sure how to answer that question. When did I meet her? I don't know. I would say that it was back when I was late teenager or early 20s, that I had an association with her.
But you had been sort of taken into the cult since you were a child, because I saw there's a photograph where you're in it, and you're at the back of the photo, and
Yes,
in that photo
but
you must have been about what, 14, 13?
no, I was a lot older. I
Oh,
was about 20, 25 or 26 or 7, something like that. It was back in the early 90s that I remembered when this photograph was taken. And how it was taken was that I was at Eildon, and Anne Hamilton Byrne liked to deal in numbers, as they all do, as you know, and she wanted 13 children to be going to church on that day, and she had them all dressed up in the same type of outfits or uniforms, and she didn't have 13, she had 12, and she grabbed me and said that I would have to be in the photograph or go to church or whatever. And so they did me up like a young girl and put cotton wool in my mouth so that my cheeks would be plumped out and all that. And that's how I came to be in the photograph. But then I realised when I saw this photograph, when memories were coming back to me, I saw the photograph and I thought, how could that be me? And then I remembered what had been said and what had been done to me. And there is a small girl right in the very front of that photograph. and she looks about 4 or 5 or something like that. And that little girl has a connection to me. When I realised that that was me in the photograph and who that young girl was, that young child, I was in touch with the police. I phoned up the police to the person who was dealing with this Anne Hamilton burn group. And I said to him, "Who is that girl in that photograph? And who is that young girl?" I said, "What is the name of that young girl?" And he said, all the mothers and all the mothers and children are all accounted for. And he dismissed it because he too was involved with the cult and very heavily in the cult. And then that got sort of squirreled away for quite a while. And I know that that is true. And I know who the young girl was or is. She would probably be now in her 50s or something like that. I had been in touch in the last few years with one of the children in the cult, and I'd asked about this young girl, and he had said that she didn't want to know anyone in the cult. She wanted to leave that part of her life alone. But
This is
what was
yes.
said was that this young girl was the only child that Anne Hamilton Byrne had got, or so-called adopted, that she wouldn't tell the name of the mother. She was the only child that she wouldn't say who was the mother. They said that the child was a member of the cult. And I digested this for a while, and I thought, this can't be right, because I was never a member of the cult. And then as the years went by, I realised that I was used by the cult in different ways. Yeah, I'm rambling now. I'm sorry.
So that we can get some context for our viewers.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to get back to the beginning of the story if we could. So basically, for those of you that are watching, Ms. X was in the cult since she was a teenager, and she had only met Anne Hamilton briefly or had some kind of association with her directly. Ms. X had another handler who we're going to talk about as well, though the memories only started to surface. Now, I've been working with Miss X for many years, so I'm aware of some of the inner the things that happened. And could you tell us about drugs being used and sexual abuse, and what do they do to you? You were used for prostitution. You were used for all sorts of things in the cult, were you not? Could you speak to us of the things that started to surface in your memories? Because there was psychedelics, there was LSD, there was drugs, there was hypnosis, there was all sorts of things involved. This story reads a bit like a MK Ultra story.
Yes, I kept on researching it and trying to find out what had happened, and I found out that the Anne Hamilton Byrne was connected with the MK altar. It was quite hidden, but it was connected with them. I believe, from what I can remember, that my eldest sister was involved, a willing participant, and was involved with the cult. And through her, she got me involved. And they used all sorts of tactics. They, as you said, drugs, hypnotism, LSD was a main thing that they used, and they used that with the children, and they used that with adults as well as having adults that were procured in the from single mothers or from women that gave up their children. And
What happened
she got
to your children? Where are your children
what
and your
what
granddaughters? Are they
happened.
in the cult now?
No, yes, I believe so, but I don't believe that. I believe that they are not totally aware of it. It's fairly hard to explain, but they basically take over the mind of the person, and the person is not aware of it. And so they she was well known, and there was a lot of publicity about this in the early 90s, where people came forward, women came forward and said that she was manipulating all these different people. She was saying, well, you will leave your husband, you will leave a note on the kitchen table, you will leave him and you will go with this other person, this other man, and you will have children by that person. And these people were doing it. They were many of them were well educated and well to do, and they were handing money over to her and doing all sorts of things. But getting back to the children, she said that she was producing a race of people, of white-haired children. She dyed all their hair white. She dressed them all the same. And she said that she was producing a superior race for when the end of the world came, or whatever, or there were only few people left. But what in fact she was doing, this is what she was saying, and people were believing this. But I found out that the children were that it was a satanic cult, and it was a pedophile cult. And these children were being used all over the world. Getting back to my children, she tried to take my eldest child from the hospital where her recruiters, who were known as aunties, used to recruit children from this particular hospital. And when I had my first child, I was in there for 13 days.
Can
And
I
when I
ask you
came,
what the name of the
go on.
hospital was?
Yes, it was the women's hospital in Melbourne, and I was a private patient of Francis Perry House, which was the private section of the hospital. But later on, it came out that it was well known that this was a place of recruitment where she would get women who were unmarried or convince them to that they couldn't look after the child and to hand them over to her. And when I was leaving the hospital with my husband, a nurse there said to my husband, have you thought of adoption? We know of a very good a couple who would really love to have this baby. Would you consider adoption? And I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? No, no, I've had this baby and no. And the nurse said, I think your wife is incapable of looking after this baby. And so when later on, when we were going home, he said, what does she mean? And I said, well, I don't know. Anyway, that was my first son. And then when he was about 5, and I checked it out with this, well, we'll call him a policeman, but he wasn't a policeman, but he worked for the police, the Victorian police. And I asked him if Anne Hamilton Byrne was going to set up a private school. And he said, yes, how did you know that? Anyway, I told him, and what had happened, my son was in first year of school, and he told me that he didn't like being dressed up as a girl and taken out of the classroom. I couldn't understand what this meant, and I checked it out with the teacher, and she said, no, that's not happening. And then the handler that I had at the time, he tried to convince me to allow my son to go to this private boarding school. And I said, I said, how often will I see him? And he said, maybe every couple of months. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. If it had have been every weekend that I saw him, I may have considered it, because it was put across that this was an exclusive boarding school, and they would be taught languages, and they would have a really good education. So that's the second time that they tried to take him. With my daughter, who was probably about 7 years after the birth of my son, I was taken to another hospital by this handler, and I had my daughter in a baby basket, and I took her to this hospital. But as I was going to the hospital with the handler, I realised that somehow or other I'd been there before. And I met this psychologist, and she said to this handler of mine that, and I remember her words very distinctly, I think that you have made a mistake with this one. If she will not accept it on a subconscious level, she's not going to accept it on a conscious level. And so that was when they tried to take my first daughter. My
And can I fill in the gaps?
Yes.
I get the feeling that there is an important piece of information that needs to be shared here. Anne Hamilton had acquired a psychological institute from one of her earlier donations, from someone that had owned a mental hospital. And I believe that is the hospital you had been taken to. Well, was it a psychological
I,
institute?
I think that the one that you're talking about is in the Kew area in Melbourne. The one I was talking about was in Heidelberg. It was a public hospital. But the one I think you're talking about, we did sort of experiments on people, or her psychiatrists or her doctors did experiments on people, like with deep sleep therapy and all these different things. I believe that I was used in that area as well, but I don't have a lot of memories of it. I do have some though.
You have
Um,
some memories. So how does that work? Is there a lot of missing time from that chapter of your life?
yes, there's a lot of missing time from really all of my life. I um, went
Except for the
along.
recent years, am I right? Since you've been away from the cult, you've got a clear timeline.
Yes, yes. Um, and I didn't have many memories of. I was going along and thought I was living a life. I was a professional person, and I was felt that I was and thought that I was working in that area and going along quite well. She was able to get me to leave my husband. There were a number of people involved that convinced me that to leave my husband. My husband was away for many months at a time, and I hardly saw him. And I was only a young woman of 28 or 30. And I was told that I was going to leave my husband and I was going to meet a wonderful man and I was going to live happily ever after. And they set all this up. They set it all up, and he became my handler, and it was an absolute nightmare.
K-
Uh,
May
yeah.
I ask, who was it that told you that?
Um, there was a psychic involved. This starts to get very involved, and I'll try to explain it. My husband worked with other men, and they were really professionals with what they did, but they were away for months at a time. The longest he was away was 6 months, and that was orchestrated by the cult. And I met one of the wives from whose husband worked with my husband, and we did a long road trip to be with them on this occasion. And she told me about this psychic that told her all the things that were going to happen to her. And she said, I have an appointment with her every 6 months, and she tells me all the things that happened to me. And she said, and I ticked them off the list. I never knew anything about this. My husband had said, don't take any notice of, we'll call her Mavis. Don't take any notice of Mavis. She's a bit off the planet. We all know that with what she does and what she says. And anyway, she gave me the address of this, the telephone number of this woman. And after a few months or whatever, I went to see her, and her name was Kerry Colkins. She was a well-known psychic who lived in the Ferntree Gully area, and I went to see her, and she told me all this stuff. She told me that I wasn't happy in the marriage, and I wasn't, because my husband was away all the time and I was very lonely. And she told me that I would meet this wonderful man and that he would um, become a husband to me. And she said, and I remember very distinctly, she said, if you want love in your life and you want to be loved, this is the way to go. And she said, in a few months' time, you're going to take it into your head that you're going to leave your husband. Anyway, this happened. I'd said to my husband that things weren't right, and I wanted. And what happened was that, starting to be a bit confused, but I was had severe pains in my stomach every so often, every couple of months. I realised at a later date that I was being impregnated and I was being aborted, and the fetus at approximately 2 months or so was being aborted from me. And they did all sorts of things to scramble time, where you didn't know that you were pregnant. But when I started to say, I think I'm pregnant, then the next thing was I had this very severe pain when my cycle came on. And I remember that I woke up one morning in severe pain. My husband wasn't there, and there was a note on the dressing table, and it said, "You have been aborted. If you continue to bleed severely, you'll have to go to the hospital." And I thought, I don't know what this means. Later on, it became clear that this had been given me, because then it was like a crack that was leading into this, what had happened to me. So just getting back to my children, we've sidetracked a bit there. I had the first child and they tried to take her. At this stage, I was had left my husband, and this man had come into my life. He was extremely abusive. He had me under control the majority of the time. I'd searched this out and couldn't understand what was happening. I spoke with a hypnotherapist and he told me that I was probably under control 24 hours of the day. I was working in a professional way, but then I remembered him wiping my memory every night before I went to sleep. And
May I ask you for a moment?
yes,
Do you
yes.
recall how he did this?
Yes, I was under. He was able. I believe. He told me that later on. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit tangled up. It's hard to explain, but when I was with him for a while, and I was apparently very difficult to control. He had to be physically abusive, and drugs were used, and all sorts of things happened. And he kept on saying to me, "You don't know what you have experienced, and you'll never be able to cope with it. You join the family, and we will help you overcome this, and we will give you medication. You will be on medication for the rest of your life." I
Can
said,
I ask
"I'm not
you?
yet, no,
So you
yep,
didn't actually ever join the group. He
no,
became your handler, became your man in a sense, was abusive to you, was drugging you, was beating you, was psychologically, and then
yep,
announced to you that you are part of this organization that you didn't even know that you were part of, but you had lots of
yep,
missing time and you believed that you were having babies and they were being taken from you. And you didn't know because they were messing with you in so
yes,
many ways. Do you mind
yes,
saying his name, or is that a problem?
um, no, it's not a problem, but that'll identify me. He has now passed in 2000, I think it was 2019. Um, his name was Alan Parker, and they um, manipulated me to meet him and all of this so that I didn't even know really what was going on. And uh, he kept saying to me, "Join the family and everything will be all right. Join the family." And he said to me, "You don't even know how many children you've had." And I said, "Yes, I do." And he says, "No." He said, "Nothing in your life has been of your choice. It's all been um, chosen for you." And I had memories um, where I wrote down what had been said to me. Um, and I used that later on. Anyway, he was extremely abusive, and all this that I'd been told that he was going to love me, which was obviously what I was wanting. I wanted my husband to be around, and all I wanted was my husband and to have my children and look after my children, because I'd been brought up in a dysfunctional family and I didn't want that to be my children's lives. Anyway, I said, "No, I'm not joining the family." I said, "You haven't got a family." I'd never sort of had really dealings with his family. Um, and I said, "No, you haven't got a family." And he said, "You don't know." He said, "You don't know the power that we have and what we can do." And I thought this was all nonsense. And this went on for quite a while. And then one day, I was trying to get away from him quite often. I took the children that I had at that time. I took them to a refuge, and I stayed in a refuge a couple of times. There was another time that they shoved me into the hospital, um, and they said that I'd tried to kill myself. And I said, "No, I just wanted um, asleep." I said, "I did not want to kill myself." Um, and so they scrambled up my mind, as it were. They raped my mind as well as my body. And so when I wouldn't join in with the family, and they said, "Well, you've got one last chance. We're only going to give you one last chance to say yes." And I said, "All right, I'll say yes." And he said, "You don't mean it. You don't mean it." And I said, "Of course I don't mean it." Um, and he said, "Then we'll have to put plan B into operation, he said, that's plan A. He said that you join the cult. He said that you join the family. He didn't call them a cult. He said the family. And he said, we'll put plan B into operation. And so what happened, he said, we've got all these plans for you. He said, you have been our best subject, which I later on realised was mind control. And he said, if you want to find out about your life and what has been done, he said, read the Lancet papers, which I later on found out was a medical journal in England called Lancet, and where medical doctors wrote about their experiments or about their whatever they were doing. And he said, go and read that, he said, because you'll find out what you have experienced. And so I tried to get away from him over a number of years, and I left him and took my children, and he got me back, whatever. And then I was in a refuge with my children, and he was trying to get me back by saying that my house that I owned was being taken over by his son's girlfriend. Of course, I didn't want that. And I was sick at the refuge, and I was vomiting, and I basically had morning sickness. When I first went there, the staff there said, we believe that you have been raped. Would you get examined? And I didn't know about with a traumatic incident that you could forget it. And there were reasons why psychologically I forgot. It was situations with my own biological family. We can't go into that because we'll sidetrack too much. But anyway, they told me I had been severely raped and I wouldn't get examined. And then when I had this morning sickness, I was there for maybe 5 or 6 weeks or whatever, and I was vomiting, and they said, we think that you're pregnant. And so soon after that, I left the refuge, took my children, and I, unbeknownst to this handler, I went to have a pregnancy test at the chemist, and he told me, he said, you're pregnant. How do you feel about that? And I said, fine. Then when I went home, I told him that I was pregnant, and he told me that the child wasn't his. And I said, how dare you say that? I've been with nobody else excepting you and my husband. He said, you've been with half of Melbourne, he said. And I said, no, I haven't. And this is what he was saying to me all the time. I felt later on that they were trying to take me from a woman that had plenty of morals to a woman that had no morals whatsoever. And I thought this was their plan originally. Anyway, I was pregnant, and a couple of months later, the police raided my house. They apparently went to the wrong house, and he saw them out the window with their torches, the police with their torches and whatever, and they finally got to my house. By this time, the men that he had in the house raping me had ran through the house and escaped over the back fence and got out of the place. Apparently, he was doing a lot of this, having men in the house, and I was being raped, but I didn't remember anything. And the police got into the house and they said, was I all right? Apparently, they'd had a call that said that I was being raped or whatever, and they went to check it out. But Alan, he was absolutely terrified, and I can't go into too much detail because we'll be here all year. And he got out of it, and the police were, I said, go and get them, go through the house, get these people, because they'd said that these couple of men had escaped through my house, but they hadn't. The police were there to check me out, and I said, "No, I'm all right. I'm all right." And then when they left, Alan got on the phone to a friend of his, and he said, "Oh, mate," he said, "I just, we nearly got caught." He said, "I'm out of here." He said, I'm not staying here." And he was sweating like a pig, you'd say. He was extremely like he was terrified of being caught. And the following day, he caused an argument with me and he left the house. He hardly had any clothes or anything like that in the house, even though I believe we were in a relationship, and he was sometimes he was at the house and sometimes he wasn't, but he was mainly around the children. He had me working at least 2 jobs, and so I wasn't at home very much at all. On the weekend, I wasn't home. I was out working because I was supporting my children. I was paying all the bills and all that. And anyway, as I said before, I was starting to become a bit not suspicious, because I wasn't suspicious, that I needed to get out of this relationship. And Alan had left the house, and then he was coming back to my house, and he was trying to convince me to join in with the family, and I wouldn't do it. And he said, you don't know what has happened to you in your life. You will never survive it. He said, you'll be put into a mental home, and he said all these things. And then this particular day, I was at I was at a group. It was classed as a spiritual group. And at around 12 o'clock on this day, I had this strange feeling that my children were in danger, or my daughter was in danger, and I had to get to her and protect her, or keep her away from Alan. I didn't know at that time. Anyway, I rushed out of the place, and the teacher of the group said, "Oh, so you've got to go, have you?" And I said, "Yes." And I realised that they used me a lot with post-hypnotic suggestion. They were able to manipulate me, and I was told by Alan Parker that I was a very rare person, as it were, because there were only 1 or 2% of the population could do what I could do. I later on found out through this hypnotherapist that I could be under complete control, but nobody would know, excepting for the handler, that I was under complete control. When people are under hypnosis, there's a sort of a feeling about them that it's strange or whatever. But I could operate as a person living a life and be under total control. Anyway, I left this group and I went to my daughter's school. She was in the second year of school, and I raced in and said, I want to, please, when the children come back from the excursion, please don't let Alan Parker take my daughter. And they said, why is that? I said, I don't know. I've just got this feeling that she's going to be in very bad circumstances. And they said, the excursion isn't today, it's tomorrow. And I said, all right then, I'll take my daughter now. And this was lunchtime. I put my daughter in the car and she was sat in the back. And as I drove along to go home, I had a feeling of I need to talk to her. And I stopped the car and I turned around and said to her, what has happened? What is wrong? And she showed me the mannerisms and told me that she was being sexually abused by her father. And then I put two and two together and I thought, this is why he has been so bad to me, that he's covering up what he is actually doing. My daughter told me that the last weekend when I wasn't there, she said that my son was running around the house screaming, help, help, somebody's got to help us, we've got to get helped. And the three girls, my three daughters that I had then, they were there, and my eldest daughter told me what he was doing. She said that he wouldn't give them any food or drink or anything to eat until he had sexually abused them. And he was going from room to room in the house and abusing them. And so I thought, I have to tell somebody. So I went to my GP and I told him what was happening or what my daughter had told me. And he said, I need to make a telephone call. And he made this telephone call to another doctor. And this was the same doctor that I'd spoken with about this photograph that we talked about earlier on, the photograph that was on the Anne Hamilton Byrne website. And this doctor got back to me and he said, if you talk about this, it's going to be really bad for you and you will lose your children. And I thought, why would I lose my children when he's sexually abusing them? And of course, I couldn't have this. I wouldn't, anyway, I wouldn't consent to it or anything like that. And he asked me a number of times to consent to it or whatever. And I said, no. And then,
Sorry, Just
Yeah,
who asked you to consent to it? The doctor.
no. The doctor said that if I if I said anything about this, about what Alan was doing, that I would lose my children. But Alan had said to me that to join the family, he said that I needed to join the family. And so then I was at the doctor's surgery for a couple of hours, and then I went and got my other two children who were had the in daycare, and I had the three little girls, and I got home. And by this time, it was about 2:30 or 3:00. There was I had asked them what had happened, and the three of them all agreed that this had happened and what he was doing. And I said to them that it would stop and I would look after them. The next thing I knew, there was a knock at the door and the police were there. And I said, how did you get the notification? Or how did you know? Because this was only a couple of hours after they had told me. It was all new to me, and I was in disbelief. And they took the two little ones out the back and questioned them. And then my other daughter, she was about five, about 5.5. They interviewed her, and she told them exactly what she had told me. And then at the end of the interview, the police said to me, "There's no evidence here, and we're not taking the case any further." And I thought they were going to protect my children and me. And so then all hell broke loose. All these different agencies became involved. Videos were made of my children talking about the abuse, and a whole lot of. They were examined by a child psychiatrist, and she did a report saying that, in her opinion, the children had been sexually abused, and that also that I was being abused, but she didn't say sexually. She said, this is a bad relationship for this woman and she's better not to be in it. I later on found out that this psychiatrist, I found out that they were all involved and they were all just playing games, and I didn't even know anything about it. So the there was
Can
this
I fill in some of the gaps, just for
yes,
the people watching?
yes,
So, in the beginning, before it was called the family, it was called the White Brotherhood. This cult, just for those of you that know, Anne Hamilton had started as a yoga teacher, and she was married, and she had had a child, and she was going to adopt another child legitimately from the adoption agency, and her husband had a car accident on the way to fetch the child. That ruined her chances for having an adoption for a child. She had then become depressed and trying to find a way. She had gotten involved in yoga. She had become a yoga teacher, and she had lots of yoga students that looked up to her. And she had started to create a sort of very closely knit group of women that were all around her as their guru, if we can call it that. And she had started an organization unofficially. And it was then that she realized that this was something that could become bigger. She then recruited a prominent psychiatrist. I forget his name. He was born in the UK. You can Google this. It's all available out there. The information's all across the web. And
I think
he had
you're
recruited for Anne Hamilton a number of psychologists psychiatrists, and different medical doctors and surgeons. So in her group of 500 plus um,
Yes.
cult members, number of them were psychologists, a number of them were psychiatrists, a number of them were the police, a number of them were in the courts, in judges. She had recruited highly prominent people from different walks of life. She was a highly financial, she became a multimillionaire through the money that she made from this cult. And she had recruited people that were extremely rich. They had all bought highly expensive properties around the cult base, and she
Yes.
had inherited a psychological hospital, a psychiatry hospital, which she had
Yes.
used to have people sectioned, people that didn't agree with the cult, people that were against her, people that tried to let people know that she was taking children. She had up to 20 to 30 children at a time in her special home in this secluded area where she had the cult HQ, and she was bringing them up as if they were her own children, but she had been stealing these children from mothers in very much the same kind of situation as Ms. X is telling us. This is a story that many women have told, and they were using drugs, psychiatry, psychologists, psychiatrists were all in on the game,
Yes.
and this is just a little bit of a background for people. So this is why when Miss X went to her doctor was in on it.
Yes.
This was a
I,
highly
yes.
financially rich organization.
I was only really going to doctors that were cult doctors. If I went to another doctor, it was I was dismissed.